In this video, I want to share something about the inner critic, and in the specific, why it is so important to understand really what the inner critic is saying. The reason why this is so important is that we may know what the inner critic says when it is more aggressive, more diminishing, but there could be more. There could be more content that we think it's our thinking, but it's actually the inner critic. It's important to identify, to put a kind of a boundary around what is inner critic and what it's not, what it's me. I am and I have an inner critic. It's important because when we can identify everything that is actually inner critic, then we can do this separation between I am and I have an inner critic. And that allows you to separate what you believe that it's true, what you experience as your own thinking process, as you what you experience as your own self-reflection, as your own content, and what it's actually just inner critic. There is a kind of a, I don't know, almost a trend that with self-reflection, it's important also to see what you're not doing well, what you could do better. And that's, in a way, it's true. The inner critic uses this sometimes to legitimate inner critic opinion, to legitimate criticism that is not really constructive and that is also not really based on you not being able to do things, is more based on fear, because we'll talk about it in another video. But the reason the inner critic criticizes is fear, wanting to protect you. So it's really important that even if you self-reflect, that you can do that after you have separated who you are from what you have, the inner critic that you have, and being able to say, my inner critic is concerned with that. My inner critic does not believe I can do that. So it's really important to go looking for more of the things that the inner critic is actually introducing in our thinking process, but it's not us being, it's the inner critic saying. So there are two main ways that I identified. If you can think of more, just put them in the comment for everybody to learn from you. But these two, I think, are really important, effective, and I will explain you also why. The first one is using the wheel of life. The wheel of life, you can actually Google it. I will put in the comments a link to my version of the wheel of life that is has a few more sections, but it doesn't really, the important thing is that you use the wheel of life. That is a circle divided in 8 to 12 sections. Every section mentions one area of your life. So your body, your career, money, family, relationship, with friends, romantic relationship, your personal development, the environment where you live. And the way you can explore the inner critic using the wheel of life is by connecting with your inner critic, allowing, say, I want to know what you think about how I am doing in the area of body, physical health. So does the inner critic think you are healthy, your body is looking good, you're doing everything, at best to maintain your body, to be fit or not? So by poking the bear and really asking about this specific area, and by using the wheel, you will end up asking about pretty much everything. You're going to get a lot of feedback. And you can write it down and realize how involved the inner critic is in your life. Don't worry about that. The final objective is to be able to separate, is to be able to say, oh, so my inner critic doesn't like my appearance. My inner critic thinks I should cut my hair. My inner critic thinks I should get different kind of glasses. My inner critic thinks I should use some makeup at my age because I cannot just show up in video like this. My inner critic thinks I should sport more often. My inner critic thinks I'm eating too much sweets. Or so the first step is write down for each area, what does your inner critic think about you in that area? So body, health, career. What does your inner critic think about your career? Are you perfectly in the place you're supposed to be, you want it to be, or are you under-evaluating yourself? Are you not being paid enough? You're, misused at work. They are asking you to do too much, or you're doing a really menial job you could do better, whatever. This is what I expect inner critics to say. You may have your personal brand. We all have. Just notice as first, make a kind of an inventory. So step one, inventorize what the inner critic says in all this area. Step two, really important, change the dialogue. Better said, instead of I'm eating too much, it becomes the inner critic believes I'm eating too much. You can do this writing. Writing is really effective, activate the brains, and writing pen on paper has a really powerful effect. But you can also experiment. If you say, there's a lot of things I wrote down, I don't have the time now to write all these, the inner critic believes, the inner critic says, the inner critic is concerned. What you can also do is to say it out loud, to read your list and say, oh, my inner critic thinks I should sport more often. It's really disappointed in me. My inner critic thinks I should ask for a pay raise. My inner critic thinks I should live in a nicer apartment. My inner critic thinks I should have a partner by now. Or my inner critic thinks I should have children. Or my inner critic thinks I'm not raising my children right. So you can either write down a second time and make it as something the inner critic says, believes, is worried about, or you can say it out loud. The sound is also really powerful. What you're doing here is in the first, the first time when you inventorize, you may feel quite identified. You may kind of believe that you are not doing well in those areas that your inner critic suggests. But when you turn it around and you write, my inner critic thinks this, you are distanciating yourself. So you are creating energetically the difference between I am and the inner critic that is a part of me that I have as this opinion. That allows a certain distance that allows you to see that there are two versions of reality, at least, and that the one of the inner critic is just one of them. And you can notice also what is, how could you fill this space? How could you just say, hey, there must be a reason if I am in this job? Maybe there is something else that keeps me there. Hey, if I don't sport more often, why is that? Am I okay with that? What is going on there? Looking more compassionately to yourself and looking at what you want, not what the inner critic wants. Also because, spoiler alert, you could try day and night to make your inner critic happy, but that will never happen. It's never enough. And that has to do with the real purpose of the inner critic. That is not to make you better, is to protect you somehow. And you're never really protected, for good. So there is always a need to keep, staying on the piece and keep criticizing everything to make sure that as many things as possible are addressed to reduce risks to a minimum. That's the way the inner critic thinks. It doesn't really work, as you may have noticed, but that's the movement behind. And that makes that it never comes a moment where it's done, when, no, now you're good. Unless we change the relationship with the inner critic, that's never going to happen. So this is the first step to change that relationship, to create this distance between you and the inner critic. The second way, you can do them both. or you can choose the one that speaks the most to you. Try them both and see the one that feels like it works better. The second way that you can get to really know more about what your inner critic thinks about you is writing a letter to your younger self. You can write a letter, for instance, to your teenage self. So you are starting to understand as a teenager how life goes, and you're starting to make plans, and you're starting to envision how it is to be adult. Now you are adult, you can look back, and as you write to yourself, you can be completely open. You don't really need to do as if or making it a bit better. What I notice is that when I talk to people, people somehow, even if they talk about their inner critic, and even if they're not going to say, oh, my body is fantastic, I know. But instead of saying, I feel so ugly, utterly ugly, they're going to kind of sugarcoat it a little bit, because as we try to say out loud what the inner critic says to us, we realize that that's not decent, that you cannot talk to people like that. You cannot even talk to yourself like that and get away with the not being judged by others in a way. So when we bring this conversation outside to feel less uncomfortable, sometimes we sugarcoat what the inner critic says. For instance, you may feel you're really bad at your job, or you really don't like, and you have no idea why you're there. But you say, yeah, well, yeah, I'm not really passionate about my work. You could minimalize it and make it really, not that a big deal. That's when you talk to people outside of yourself. That's why if I had asked you to even write a letter to your best friend, probably you would have sugarcoated a little bit, also not wanting to worry other people, you know. But if you write to your younger self, you want to be honest, because writing to your younger self is really trying to make it right, to get it right this time. It's really like, if you do not start to do those kind of things now, the inner critic is going to eat you up later on. So you can write it whatever way. If you manage to write it already like this, like say, hey, be aware that the inner critic is around the corner for this, and this. Or you can say, I'm not really happy about myself for this reason, and this reason. Either way, you realize, if you look back at yourself lovingly, what are the things in your life that gives you pain at the moment, give you pain because the inner critic is badgering you about those. So that's another way to become even more aware of the theme that are worrying your inner critic. It is really important to say what these things of be careful, the example I just gave, writing to your younger self and saying, be careful, start now to be prepared, what is around the corner. That's not the way it is. As I said, the inner critic will never be satisfied. If we talk about body, I met women with an absolutely perfect body that were so concerned and felt they were so ugly. I met people that had a fantastic career and they felt so dissatisfied. The critic, it's never good enough kind of modus. And that's why one of the big reasons we need to take a step aside and being able to separate ourselves. So, a little recap. Important to find out everything that your inner critic is saying, or as much as you can gather right now, but going a bit farther than the usual, like, yeah, I know my inner critic doesn't like my figure. It should be okay enough with my work, or just go and find everything so that you can create a massa. You say, oh, this is the inner critic. And then you put it on the side and you identify yourself as I am, and I have an inner critic. And everything that you found out the inner critic is saying, you can change it back and say, instead of saying, I don't like my appearance, my inner critic doesn't like my appearance. I'm not paid enough, I should ask more. My inner critic thinks I'm not paid enough and I should be paid more. I'm not good at my job. My inner critic thinks I'm not good at my job. And as I said, you can ideally write down all these things. If that's asked too much of you, if that would mean you are not doing the second part of the exercise, do it just speaking up what you wrote in the new form. The inner critic thinks, the inner critic believes. What you can also consider after doing this exercise is making a practice, a daily practice of writing every day, at the end of the day, at least 3 things that your inner critic told you that day, that you noticed. Oh, yeah, the inner critic found that I was really superficial. I got late to the meeting, and I could have gone a bit earlier, prepare myself. I didn't present really well, you know. Everyday 3 means that you are making a habit of creating a new relationship where you have more and more clear, and the more you exercise, the more it becomes automatic. You have more and more clear that you are, and the inner critic is something you have. And you can more and more easily separate your thinking, your self-reflection from the opinion of the inner critic. This is just the first step. There are a few other steps, but if this is not done, the rest doesn't work. If you cannot separate yourself from the inner critic, the rest does not work. So this is really important. You can use the wheel of life, go through all the areas of life as represented in the wheel of life to ask the inner critic for each area what the inner critic thinks about you. You can write a letter to your younger self and do both as well. And then after having done this more grounding exercise to connect with the inner critic, start a daily practice to get really grounded in the differentiation between you and your inner critic. Every day, 3 things that your inner critic, said, mentioned that day about you and how you function that day. Function, looked, felt, said, whatever comes up. The more you do it, the more you will become attuned to all the little things, to, all the little ways the inner critic is actually on your case. I really hope this helps. If there is any feedback, any experience that you want to share it in the comments. Really, really happy to read. I will put a link to the Wheel of Life so that you can use that if you want.